This morning being Father's Day, I want to share a message I've titled The Father's Heart for Children this morning. Some of us here are fathers. Many of you obviously are not fathers, at least 50% I would say, if not more. But God's Father's heart comes through, for children comes through. And I want to share a message this morning out of Genesis chapter 21. We're going to read a passage here. It's a story you may know well about Ishmael and Isaac. And I want to share this story and just pull out a few things about God's heart, his Father heart for children. Genesis chapter 21, we'll start with verse 8. The child grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring." Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby about a bow shot away, for she thought, "I cannot watch the boy die." And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. As I read this passage of Scripture, and many of us, if you've been in church for a while, would know the story, but the short version is God had promised Abraham that he would have a son who would, as his inheritance, and that he would be the father of many nations. And he and Sarah were old, and it wasn't happening, and they took matters into their own hands. And Abraham and Sarah, his wife's maidservant Hagar, had a child, and that was Ishmael. And we know that then Isaac, a number of years later, was born. And God fulfilled the promise, and did the promise anyway. But as we read this story, I think about Ishmael, and I think about him as a child. None of this is his doing. The circumstance that he's in is not his doing. All of a sudden, he and his mum are out in the desert without anything to drink, run out of water, thinking they're going to die. And Ishmael is in this situation through no fault of his own. And it made me think about children in our world today who are in terrible situations through no fault of their own. They find themselves, whether it be in poverty or in situations here in Australia, all around the world, children find themselves in situations that it's not their doing, but they're there. And yet here, in the midst of this, we see God's heart for Ishmael in the middle of it all. We see God's heart for this boy, for this child. There is hope because the Father has a heart for every single child in the world today. I want to draw out a number of things out of this passage, and the first one is that every child has great potential. Every single child has great potential. We see here in verse 11 and 13 that it was distressing to Abraham, but God said to him, "Do not be distressed about the boy and his maidservant." And then in verse 13 he goes on to say, "I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring." It's like something's going to come of Ishmael as well. See, God sees the potential in every single one of his children. No matter what circumstance children come into the world, no matter the situation, no matter what circumstance they find themselves in, God sees every single one of these children, and he sees potential in them. There was a little boy who was a sponsored child from Kenya. And this little boy wrote to his sponsor, who lived in the north of England, and she was already an elderly lady, and he wrote to her when he found out that she was his sponsor, and he wrote and he said, Dear sponsor, thank you so much for sponsoring me, but as you can see in my photo, I'm not very handsome. I'm sorry. I know. We all would react like that. She gets the letter and she reads it and she looks at the photo and she writes back and says to him, to the little boy, thank you so much for your letter. I got your letter. I've got your photo. I actually think you're really handsome. Anyway, the next letter comes back from him and says, thank you so much for saying that I'm handsome. And then writes back again. He says, but as you can tell from my school results, I'm not very smart. She writes back and says, I'm not worried about your school results or this. Everyone has something they're good at, and there's going to be something that you're good at. And the letters go back and forth, and he writes a letter one day to his sponsor. Dear sponsor, I was in a running race today, and I won the race. I was the fastest boy in the race. And she writes back to him and says, well, that must be the thing that you're good at. I want you to just practice running and run and run and run. And the letters go back and forth, and he writes back again. And, well, today I ran in a race again. I'm now the fastest boy in my school. And the letters go back and forth. And I won a whole district race. I'm the fastest boy in the district. Firstly in his village and then in the wider district. And they keep going back and forth. And eventually, as a young man, he writes back and says to his sponsor, I'm now one of the fastest in the country. I'm going to the Olympics. And this boy, Douglas, grew up to be a man, and he competed in the 1988 Seoul Korea Olympics in the marathon and got the silver medal. He also competed in other world championships, won a gold in a world championship. But on his way home from the Seoul Korea Olympics, the Kenyan team went back to Kenya, but they went to London first. And so he arranged to go and surprise his sponsor and to go and visit her. And so he gets to her house, and she lives in a little cottage, and he's a tall guy, and he sort of almost has to duck through the doorway to get to there. And he's got the silver medal around his neck, and he takes it off and he hands it to her, and he says, I want you to have this, because without your encouragement, I never would have done it. And she was like, no, I saw you on TV, but he insisted I never would have done it without you. Every child has great potential. They just need someone in their corner. They just need someone cheering them on. They just need someone encouraging them. And that can be the big things, but so often it's the little gestures and the little things that children, the kind words and the little things that make children be encouraged. Because every child has great potential. And that's God's heart is for his children. Second thing I want to draw out is God is asking us to not ignore his children. In verse 15 and 16, I'll read it again. It says, when the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. This is Hagar. Then she went off and sat down nearby about a bowshot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. They run out of water, and Hagar's just beside herself. I can't look. I can't watch. I'm going to put him under the bush because I can't watch this happen. Sometimes I think we can be like that. I talked before about how 16,000 children today will die before their 5th birthdays. And when you really start to think about that, you almost don't want to think about it. But every now and again, because I can't do it every day, I'll be a mess, but every now and again I think about that in my context as a father. I think about being one of those parents who today will hold their child in their arms. And I can't think about it every day, because if I did, I would just be a mess all the time. But I can't not ever think about it either, because I was just lucky enough to be born here. We were just lucky enough to be born here. My son's lucky enough to be born here. And when I think about that, it messes with me, and it should. It should mess with us. To think about what children go through today. The thought of when my son says he's hungry, which he says a lot, to not be able to give him food because I don't have any is a heartbreaking thought. To think that my son would be sick and to not be able to take him to the doctor, to be able to have the means to do nothing, that breaks my heart. And it should. It should break all our hearts. God is asking us to not ignore that. To not put it away and go, well, it's too much to think about. I'm just going to put it over there where I can forget about it and pretend that it doesn't exist. It happens today in our world. To not even think about the kids in our community there's kids in our community who are going through a real rough time right now. We can't just put that away. God is asking us to not ignore it. When Compassion began in 1952, it was a man called Everett Swanson who started Compassion. He was a Baptist minister from Chicago. I won't tell you the whole story, but essentially he was walking through South Korea and a little boy stole a jacket out of his arm. And that started a chain of events that led Everett to discover that there were orphans whose parents had died in the war who were freezing to death and starving in that time. And he did something in the immediate, bread and soup for the kids, but he went home to Chicago and for him it was like, this is something I can't ignore. Because if he did, Compassion wouldn't exist today. But he said, I can't ignore that. I have to go back and I have to start something. I have to help these children. I can't put it out. I just can't pretend that I just did one little thing and that was it and just pretend it doesn't exist, because it does exist and it is real. And God is asking us to not ignore his children. Proverbs 31:8 says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. God is asking us to not ignore his children, but to capture God's heart for his children and to respond. A third thing to draw out of this morning, God hears the cries of his children. Verse 17, these are powerful words. God heard the boy crying. God heard the boy crying. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, and we'll read on in a moment what it said. But just God heard the boy crying. God hears the cries of every single child in this world. He loves them so much. Every one of those children is created in his image, and God loves them and hears their cries. He's asking us to join with him in hearing their cries. If we can put a picture up of these two young ladies that I met in the Philippines. They actually grew up on the same island, Bohol in Tagbilaran City, where your church partnership is. I think we'll get that photo in a moment. I met these two young ladies, Yvonne and Gina. And I got to meet Gina. I got to go to where she grew up. If we go to Gina's in the yellow top. If we go to the next slide, you'll see Gina's house where she grew up. That is her house. That's it. They slept outside under what they called a tent, but that's not a tent. We have tents, like with multiple rooms and canopy. We've got amazing tents. You can go down to BCF and get one today. They're phenomenal. This was a tarp with some bamboo, and that was it. And this was where everything, all her parents' possessions were. And yet her cry to God, when she came into Compassion's program at about 9, she got to accept Christ. And when she was 13, her parents started to really persecute her and give her grief about her faith. They were happy that she got some support, but this whole Christian thing, no. Even her extended family did, and they did for a number of years. And Gina told me, as I met her story, and she's like, my prayer in those couple of years, my prayer was this: God, I pray that my parents would know you like I do. That was the cry of her heart. Which for me, I think maybe the cry of my heart, I'm just being transparent here, would be, God, can I have somewhere better to live? God, can I have more food? God, can I have this? God, I'd be just being transparent. I think many of us might pray that way, but her prayer was not for any of the material things. Her prayer was, God, I pray my parents would know you like I do. And eventually they did. When she was 15, they came to Christ. I got to meet her parents. They made this statement, which again messes with our heads a little bit, I think. And they're like, we're so glad we were born into poverty, because if we weren't, we never would have met Christ. That says something pretty powerful to you, doesn't it? God hears the cries of his children. The fourth thing I want to draw out, God is asking us to respond. God called out to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. And then verse 18, lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. The angel of the Lord cried out to Hagar to get her attention, and I believe God is calling out to us today and to his church here in Queensland and in Australia to get our attention about his kids. He told Hagar, help him up and hold him by the hand. I love the picture of this, helping a child up. I love that. I think it represents so well what Compassion's ministry does. It helps a child up. And when You can help a child up out of poverty to stand on their own 2 feet. They flourish. They thrive. I've met so many children through Compassion's program, so many that have graduated now. They thrive. Our program helps them with food and medication and education and vaccinations. It introduces them to Jesus. Every church I went to, I mentioned before, 136,000 come to Christ in 1 year. Every church I visited, they talked about the number of parents and siblings who were also coming to Christ and being baptised. It's lifting them up out of poverty and giving them the opportunity and the opportunities that we would take for granted. And then it talks about take him up and then hold him by the hand. I love the visual of holding a child by the hand. I love when Harry and I will be walking somewhere, and I love it when he will grab my hand to hold my hand. I love that notion of holding a child by the hand. It's just that sense of, I'm with you. I'm here, I'm with you. The other young lady in that picture up there, Yvonne in the polka dot top, I had to hear her story, and she talked about how before she was born, her dad was already out of the picture. And then when she was born, her mum decided she didn't want to raise her. And so mum gave her to her grandparents to raise her. And so she's already, as a child growing up, dealing with all sorts of rejection, and the home that she grew up in was not dissimilar to Gina's. It was very small, holes in the roof. It's not a good situation. And when she was, again, about 8 or 9, she came into Compassion's project at the local church and started to go and was fed and all the different things that I talked about, the medical care, hear the gospel, going to school. But when she was about 12, 13 years of age, her grandparents were kicked out of where they were living and had to go and move a distance away. It was about 5 or 6 kilometres from the church. Now, I don't mind 5 or 6 kilometres, that's nothing because we just get in the car and drive it. But for Yvonne, it's like, well, that's too far for me to go to get to the church project, and she gave up on going to the project. The great thing about Compassion's program is when a child will stop coming for whatever reason, if they don't turn up a couple of times, the church, the workers there are straight onto it. They're like finding her. And so it took them about a month. Because they'd moved, they went to where she was living. It took them a little while to track them down. And in that month, Yvonne had got a job working at nights in a factory. And so at 12 years of age, 12, 13 years of age, she'd work in a factory at night and go to school during the day, and that's how she provided for herself, which no child should ever have to do. And she said these words, she said, I gave up on Compassion, but Compassion didn't give up on me. And she talked about how when they tracked her down, they convinced her to come back to the program, and to make sure that she would go, every Saturday, which was project day, that would be the day they would go to the project, someone would walk from the church to her house, pick her up, walk her to the project. You're talking 5, 6 kilometres each way. And at the end of the day, or sometimes she would stay at someone's place so she could go to church the next morning. So it might have been on Sunday, someone would walk her back and then walk back again. So someone or multiple people were walking in excess of 20 kilometres every weekend to make sure that Yvonne stayed in the project and stayed a part of it. That's what I call holding a child's hand, coming alongside them in relationship. That's the calibre of people that will be serving in the local church projects where the children that you want to sponsor today are. Today, she's almost finished her accounting degree at university. She has big dreams. She's reconciled with her mum, and she's got 4 half-brothers and sisters. They all come to Christ. They're all in church. They're all following Jesus. It's a great story. She has plans to get a job straight out of university, but then she wants to eventually start her own company, and she's like, as soon as I have income, I'm going to put all my younger brothers and sisters through university. I'm going to make sure I can pay for that, and then I'm going to start sponsoring children myself. It's actually amazing hearing so many formerly sponsored children who are themselves sponsoring children as well, all because someone held her hand. I want you to think not just about, but certainly about holding the hand of a child today in sponsorship, but I want you to think about that in your everyday lives. Who are the kids in your life that just need someone to encourage them and to thank them? Maybe not physically holding their hand, but coming alongside them. 5th thing, God will open our eyes to the resources. In verse 19 it says, and God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. I love this because it says, then God opened her eyes to see the well of water. It didn't say God made the well of water appear. So God opened her eyes to see the well. The well was there the whole time. She just didn't see it. But God opened her eyes so she could see it, and she went and got Ishmael a drink. See, God is opening the eyes of people to see what we already have. And here in Australia, we are so blessed and have so much. I was talking to a group of young adults, university students a while ago, and I was talking about how if they were on Oz study and maybe had a part-time job earning a couple of $100 a week, and if they were living at home or renting with a few roommates, or even if they were renting an apartment by themselves on what they thought was so little that they were in the top, I think it was about 14% of income earners in the entire world. You can see the sort of eyes rolling back like, wow. We have so much. We are so blessed. And my prayer is that God will open our eyes to see the resources. Terry touched on it before, $48 a month. I mean, that's $12 a week. I shudder to think about the things I could spend $12 a week on very easily, just like that, without thinking. Just poop, poop, swipe, done. $12 a week can change the life of a child, along with your encouragement and support and prayers and writing letters. It makes a huge, huge difference. You know, in my role with Compassion, I'm in churches a lot of the time on weekend sharing, and I get to meet people who sponsor children. And I count that as the greatest joy to do that, because I've met people in all different stages or situations in life sponsoring children. I've met kids dragging mum and dad to the table to sponsor a child. I've met teenagers sacrificing the money they earn at Macca's or wherever they do their part-time shifts. I've met uni students sacrificing. I've met single parents who are giving beyond what you would think they might have, just being generous. I've met families with multiple kids saying, well, we'll sponsor a child for every child that we have in their family. I've met retirees. I've met just people at all stages of life. I had the pleasure of, probably a month or two ago now, seeing my oldest ever first-time sponsor, a lovely lady called Dawn, who at 89 sponsored her first child. And she was just so passionate about it. And she's like, little boy, Joe Andy, that she sponsored was 3. And she's like, I get that he's 3 and I'm 89 and I'm probably not going to be around when he's, she was very open about it. I'm probably not going to be around when he graduates. So she'd organised her daughter to take on the sponsorship down the track. And it was just, it's a joy. And so know this, when you come to sponsor a child today, I don't take that lightly at all. It's a joy to see people take that step, to open their eyes, to see what God has, and to do that, to say, I'm going to walk alongside a child, I'm going to sponsor a child, I'm going to invest into their life. It's amazing. The important thing is that when Hagar's eyes were open, she didn't just go, oh, there's a well there, this is amazing. She went and took the skin of water, filled it up and gave Ishmael a drink. It's not just about going, wow, yes, we have a lot. Wow, we're blessed. It's about what are we going to do with that. Last point this morning, I'm going to close, is that God will complete what he has begun. In verse 20, it says, God was with the boy as he grew. He lived in the desert and became an archer. God is with these children as they grow. When we sponsor a child somewhere around the world, we're not physically with them. We get to write letters. We provide financial support, which really is such a small, it's a significant, but as I think about sponsoring the children that we sponsor, I think it's such a small little thing that I'm doing. I don't think it's anything for me amazing or special. But I know God's with those kids. And I know he'll be with them as he's growing. And I know his hand is upon them. And I know he's moving in their lives. And I know God will complete the work that we get to play a small little part or role in. Like I said before, I've met many formerly sponsored children. Some who are doing amazing, amazing things. And God is still at work in their life far beyond the reach, but their sponsors played that part along the way. I pray this morning you would have captured some of God's heart, the Father heart for children. He loves his kids so much. He really does. I just want to finish by inviting you to sponsor children today. This is the part that I find the least comfortable personally. in asking people. I understand it's a sacrifice for many. When I was 19, this is just to show you, I'm trying to ask people to do things or sell things. It's not me. But when I was 19, I was a telemarketer for one day. I gave up. I had enough, couldn't do it. When I was 21, I was in Bible college and I had a few part-time jobs, and one was selling smoke alarms door-to-door on Saturdays for a month. And I sold one in a month, and that was to a lovely lady called Merle, who was in our church, and so probably felt sorry for me. So this is not something that I'm naturally comfortable with, but I would ask you this morning, or urge you this morning, to sponsor children. We have 39 little children, like little Clyde here. It's Clyde's birthday this week. He turns 4 it'll be Wednesday. He's been waiting 140 days for a sponsor. He lives with his mum and dad. His dad's sometimes employed as a day labourer. We've got another 38 little children like Clyde. I'd love to see as many of them as possible sponsored this morning. And so I would urge you to do that this morning. I'd urge you to come. We'd love to see them sponsored. Let's pray. Father, I thank you that you are our Father. And when we talk about your Father heart for children, that applies to each and every one of us here as well. God, you are for us, you love us, you are with us. You gave your Son for us. And so we thank you for that so much, for all that you've done for us, firstly. But thank you that you then want us to take on that same heart that you have. Same heart that sent your Son for us, you want us to take that on board ourselves. So I pray this morning that we would have captured your heart for our everyday lives, for the children in our world. And thank you that, Lord, that we can extend that to children around the world as well. And so I just pray for each and every person here. You would move on their heart as you would have them do that, Lord. And I thank you for that in Jesus' name.